Arizona Territory, 1881. The sun was mean that day, high over the cracked earth like it had a grudge. Nathaniel West spotted the barn from the ridge just past Dry Creek, the kind of place left to rot after the cattle had long since gone. He almost rode past it, but his horse, Flint, needed water and his own canteen was near dry. So he nudged Flint toward it, expecting nothing more than some shade and maybe a rusted bucket. What he found instead stopped him cold. There was someone inside. He heard the scuff of boots before he saw her barefoot, dirty, ribs showing through a torn calico dress. She was crouched low by an old feed bin, clutching something to her chest like she thought it might vanish if she blinked. Her hair was a tangled mess of dark auburn and her eyes wide, sharp, desperate, locked with his the moment he stepped through the doorway. "Do not come closer," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Nathaniel held his hands up slow. "Not here to hurt you, miss. Just passing through." She looked like she did not believe much in kindness. "There is nothing left in here. Just dust." "I figured. Still worth checking." He saw her glance at the satchel on his hip. Hunger was plain on her face. Not the kind that came from skipping a meal or two, but the kind that settled into your bones. He unfastened the flap and pulled out the last piece of bread he had, stale, cracked at the edges, but food all the same. "Here," he said, stepping forward and laying it on the ground between them. "I have not touched it. Yours if you want it." She stared at it for a long moment like she could not make sense of the offer. Then she grabbed it, quick as a rabbit, and bit into it like she might cry. "What is your name?" he asked after a time. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Eloise." "Eloise what?" "Darrow." He nodded. "Nathaniel West." She looked past him, toward the open door and the stretch of nothing beyond. "You traveling alone?" "I am." Her shoulders sagged like she had been holding herself upright too long. "Then I will not slow you down. You gave me bread. That is more than most." "I did not say I was leaving." Eloise blinked. "Why would you stay?" Nathaniel looked around the barn. "Because something tells me you have not eaten in days. And you are not from around here." She said nothing. "You run from something?" Her jaw clenched. "Someone," she whispered. That told him enough. He crossed to the corner, sat against the wall, and unhooked his canteen. He took a small sip, then offered it to her. Eloise hesitated. Then she joined him in the dust and drank like it was gold. They sat quiet for a while, the only sound the creak of the barn beams and the wind outside. Nathaniel studied her out of the corner of his eye. Her hands were blistered. Her feet were cut and raw. She had been walking a long time. "You got family?" he asked. "Not anymore." "Where you headed?" She looked down at her lap. "I do not know." Nathaniel breathed deep. He had not planned to take anyone with him. He barely had enough for himself. But something about the way she held herself like the world had tried to break her and failed made it hard to walk away. "You should come with me," he said. Eloise turned to him, eyes sharp. "Why?" "Because I do not like the thought of you dying out here alone." She scoffed. "You do not know me. I do not have to. I saw enough." She looked at him a long while, searching for the catch. Then she said slow, "I do not have shoes. We will find you some. I smell like the dead." He smiled. "So do I. That is what happens out here." Her lips twitched just a little. Nathaniel stood and offered her his hand. "Come on. I have a horse. We can ride to Deadwood. Maybe find work." Eloise stared at the hand like it might vanish. Then she took it, her grip firm despite her shaking fingers. It was a long ride. She sat behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. She did not speak much, but every time the wind picked up, she leaned closer, her face against his back like maybe the warmth could soak in. By the time they reached the edge of town 2 days later, he had learned a few things. Her father had died of fever. Her mother, months later. A man her uncle owed money to had tried to claim her like property. She ran. She had not stopped running since. Nathaniel got them a room above the livery stable. Cheap, clean enough, and out of sight. He bought her a pair of boots from a trader near the general store. They were too big, but she smiled when she laced them up anyway. That night, she sat across from him on the floor, legs tucked under her, eating stew like it was a feast. She kept glancing at him like she was waiting for him to change, to demand something. He just watched her eat. "You are not like the others," she said finally. He met her eyes. "You do not owe me anything, Eloise." She set her bowl down slow. "What if I want to?" Nathaniel's throat tightened. "That is not why I helped you." She studied him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand in hers. Her fingers were warm now. "Steady." "I know that," she said. They sat in silence, just holding hands. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel felt like he had found something worth staying for. The morning light came in soft through the warped window panes above the livery, casting pale shapes on the wooden floorboards. Nathaniel stood by the basin, sleeves rolled past his elbows, scrubbing a shirt with a rag and rainwater he'd fetched before dawn. The steady rhythm of cloth on wood filled the quiet room. Eloise sat cross-legged on the cot, a needle pinched between her fingers. She was patching a small tear in one of his shirts with a square of canvas he'd found in the corner stall. Her stitches were crooked but held. There was a quiet determination to the way she worked, lips pressed together in focus, jaw set. "You ever sew before?" Nathaniel asked, wringing out the shirt. "Only for dolls," she said without looking up. "And none of them had to wear the same thing more than twice." He chuckled low in his throat. "Well, I don't mind if it's uneven. Just glad to have something clean." Eloise tied off the thread and bit the end to break it. "I could mend the hem on your coat next. There's a tear near the lining. You noticed that?" "I notice most things," she said, folding the shirt neatly and placing it beside her. Nathaniel studied her a moment. Her posture had changed since they left the barn, no longer curled in on herself, no longer waiting for someone to strike. She moved like someone remembering how to breathe. "I was thinking I'd ask around the freight yard today," he said, pulling on the damp shirt. "They might need hands for the next haul north." Eloise nodded and reached for the coat. "Can I come with?" He hesitated. "It's not always kind out there. I know, but I don't want to stay shut in." She held the coat tight in her lap. "I want to see what's out there for myself." He nodded once. "All right, but stay near." They stepped out into the street just as the sun cleared the rooftops. The dirt road was already stirring, wagons creaked by, boots thudded against planks, and a man in a boiled shirt called out about iron stoves from the back of a cart. The air smelled of horses and grit and something frying down the lane. They passed a store with bolt cloth in the window and paused briefly as Eloise peered at the fabric, her hand brushing the glass. She didn't say anything, but Nathaniel filed the look away. At the freight yard, he found a man with a tobacco stain on his collar and a clipboard in hand. They talked in low tones, and after a few minutes, Nathaniel returned to where Eloise stood waiting beneath a cottonwood tree. "They'll take me on for a week's ride to Prescott," said they're light on drivers. "You'll be gone?" she asked, voice level. "No. I told them I needed work in town, not out of it. There's a smith 2 streets over who might trade coin for hauling ore." Eloise nodded. "I can help. I can carry, sweep, whatever they'll let me." He looked down at her hands, still raw in places but healing. "Let's see what they say." By midday, they found themselves in a narrow yard behind the smith shop, stacking small crates of scrap iron. The work was hot and steady. Nathaniel moved with practiced ease, while Eloise took each box like it weighed more than it did, but didn't complain once. Later, under the eaves, they shared a tin of beans and a heel of bread the smith's wife had handed them with little ceremony. Eloise leaned back against the wall, sweat at her temples, but eyes clear. "You've done this kind of work before," she said. "I have." "Did you have a place?" "For a while. Out near Fort Bowie. Ran cattle with a man named Carson. He died in the spring floods." She looked down. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Wasn't your doing." She was quiet a moment. "Then I used to think I'd marry a shopkeeper." Nathaniel raised his brow. "You still might." "I don't think I will." He didn't ask why. She didn't explain. That night, back in the room above the livery, Nathaniel lit the lamp while Eloise folded their earnings into a cloth pouch. 3 coins and a few buttons the smith had tossed in for her patchwork. "Not much," she said. "It's enough for now." She stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. I could ask the seamstress if she needs help. I saw her fitting a jacket earlier. You want to sew for strangers? I want to earn something with my hands. He nodded. Then we'll go ask in the morning. She stepped closer, her eyes tracing his face. Why are you being good to me? I don't think it's goodness, he said. Just seems right. Her hand rose, rested gently on his chest, just over the fabric he'd scrubbed clean that morning. You don't ask for anything. Don't want anything you ain't willing to give. Eloise looked up at him, her expression unreadable in the low light. Then she said softly, I don't know how to be with someone. Not really. We can figure it out, he said. She leaned her head against him and let the silence settle. Nathaniel stood still, one hand rising to rest against her back. The room was quiet, warm, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Neither of them said another word. The forge bell clanged twice as the sun crested behind the hills, casting long shadows across the alley where the smith's shop sat tucked between a tannery and a boarded-up saloon. Nathaniel and Eloise stepped around a mule cart and into the back doorway. The air inside was thick with iron and sweat, but the warmth was welcome against the chill that hadn't yet lifted from the morning. Today, the smith's wife handed Eloise a bundle of torn aprons and a rust-stiffened curtain, pointing silently toward a stool by the hearth. Eloise took them without hesitation. Nathaniel caught her eye across the room, gave a small nod before hoisting a crate onto his shoulder. By noon, her fingers were black with soot and thread dust. She worked quietly, speaking only when asked, her eyes occasionally drifting to the window where dry leaves skittered across the yard. Nathaniel, hauling scrap and sorting nails, caught glimpses of her through the doorway, her back straight, lips pressed in concentration. That evening, they walked the length of Main Street in silence. The sky bled orange along the rooftops and the wind tugged at the loose edge of Nathaniel's collar. Eloise kept her hands folded around a small cloth-wrapped parcel she hadn't opened since the smith's wife pressed it into her hands. What's in it? Nathaniel asked without looking down. I think it's cornbread, she said. They reached the edge of town, where the boarding house lanterns flickered to life. Nathaniel pointed toward a bench near the dry well. Rest a while. Eloise sat slowly, cradling the parcel in her lap. I stitched a man's coat today. He said he hadn't worn it in 2 years. Nathaniel lowered himself beside her. That's so? He asked if I'd ever been to Flagstaff. Told me about a woman he met there who made dresses out of flour sacks. Said she dyed them with boiled onions. Nathaniel chuckled softly. People get clever when times turn lean. Eloise peeled back the cloth and broke the cornbread in half. Would you ever settle? He took the offered piece. Settle? Stop riding. Stop chasing coin from one end of the territory to the other. He considered this, chewing slow. I used to think I would. Maybe build something. Cabin, maybe. Fence some land. Why didn't you? Nathaniel looked out toward the distant range, where the horizon blurred into haze. Didn't have a reason to stay put. And the land I wanted was already spoken for. Eloise pulled her knees up, resting her chin atop them. I used to imagine a red house, 2 windows in the front, a kitchen with a table that creaked when you leaned on it. Where would you put it? Where it's quiet. Where no one can find me unless I want them to. Nathaniel turned his head toward her. Would you let me find you? She didn't answer right away. Then she said, I think I already did. The bench creaked under their weight as the wind picked up again. Nathaniel set his half of bread on the step and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small tin. My mother's, he said, opening it. Inside was a handful of dried sage, a bit of twine, and a coin worn smooth. She kept that with her? Always. Said it reminded her of home. She used to burn sage when the nights got too long. Eloise reached forward, touching the edge of the tin with her fingertip. Did she ever settle? Not really. She followed my father's boots until they both wore out. After he died, she stayed in one place long enough to teach me how to hold a hammer. Eloise pulled her hand back. I don't want to be someone's weight. You're not, he said. You're someone's reason. She looked at him then, really looked, and something behind her eyes softened. I don't know how to build a life. I only know how to run. Then let's build it slow. The sun slipped below the ridge and the sky deepened to lavender. Nathaniel stood and offered his hand. She took it without hesitation. As they walked back toward the livery, the streets were quieter now, the windows glowed warm behind curtains, and the scent of stew drifted from a boarding house door. Inside the room, he let her wash first. She stood behind the curtain, humming a tune too faint to place. When she stepped out wrapped in the towel he'd left for her, she looked at him not like a girl cornered by the world, but like a woman steadying herself on new soil. He turned away to give her space, unbuttoning his shirt by the basin. Nathaniel, she said behind him. You said you didn't have a reason to stay put before. I did. Do you now? He turned, slow and sure, and met her eyes. I reckon I do. She stepped toward him, stopping just close enough that he could see the tiny scar above her brow, the curve of her collarbone. Then stay, she said. He reached up, tucking a damp strand of hair behind her ear. I already am. The first frost came quiet, dusting the rooftops and stiffening the dirt paths before dawn. Nathaniel stood outside the livery with his jacket collar turned up and his breath curling in the air. Across the way, Eloise was outside the seamstress's shop, helping lift a bolt of wool onto the porch rail. She moved with a steadier rhythm now, her footing sure, her hair pulled back with a length of twine she'd dyed with crushed berries. Nathaniel watched her a moment longer before crossing the street. You warm enough? He asked, resting a hand on the rail. She glanced up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I lined the sleeves with muslin from the scrap bin. Help some. He nodded. I spoke with the stable owner this morning. He's willing to let me buy the roan gelding outright. Says he's too stubborn for the delivery runs. You thinking of keeping him? He's got grit. Reminds me of someone. Eloise leaned against the post. Won't be long before the roads ice over. You planning to keep riding through winter? I was thinking maybe we don't ride for a while. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You mean settle? There's a plot just west of the ridge. Burned down 2 years ago in a lightning storm. The land's been sitting empty since. I asked around. No claim on it. She didn't answer right away, just looked out toward the low slope where the trees thinned and the earth stretched quiet and open. What would we do with land? She said at last. Build something. Just enough to shelter us through the cold. Come spring, maybe more. Eloise turned to face him fully. You'd stay? All the way through. I never meant to keep going forever. A gust of wind pulled at the wool bolt, and she caught it before it slipped. Her hands were red from cold, but steady as she tucked the edge beneath the rail. I never saw past the next sunrise, she said. Not before. Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice low. You see past it now? She searched his face, and something shifted in her gaze. I'd like to. That night they walked the ridge together. The stars were sharp above them, and the land lay hushed under the moon. Nathaniel carried a lantern, the light swaying over the frostbitten grass as they reached the edge of the plot. The remains of the old cabin were still there, a few scorched beams and a stone hearth half buried in ash. Eloise knelt, brushing snow from a flat rock where a doorstep had once been. It's quiet, she said. Nathaniel crouched beside her. We could clear the brush. Build something small to start. I know how to lay stone. You could sew curtains, maybe. I've never had a place I helped make. You'd have this one. Eloise looked up and the cold air flushed her cheeks. We'd need a stove. And a roof tight enough to keep out snowmelt. I'll trade work for the stove. The sawmill foreman owes me 2 days' pay. She stood and stepped toward the hearth, her boots crunching over the frozen ground. If we clear it by week's end, we could stack timbers before the freeze deepens. You speak like you've done this before. I haven't, but I've watched close. Nathaniel smiled, the gesture quiet and full. You always do. They returned to town with the first pale light of dawn brushing the hills. At the back of the stable, they unloaded salvaged boards Nathaniel had bartered for with half a day's labor. He carried the heavier pieces while Eloise sorted nails and checked the pack saddle. Inside the loft, she spread a scrap of paper across the floor and began sketching with charcoal from the stove-bin walls, door frames, a small window facing east. "You want the sun to wake us early?" he asked, leaning over her shoulder. "It'll warm the floor faster." He watched her draw, her fingers smudged, her brow creased in thought. "You sure this is what you want?" "I don't need sure," she said, setting the charcoal down. "I just need forward." Nathaniel reached for her hand. "Then forward it is." She laced her fingers through his. "When it's done, this place, it won't just be yours." "No," he said. "It'll be ours." Below them, the roan gelding shifted in his stall, the boards creaking under his hooves. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of another hard freeze. But in the loft, wrapped in the hush of morning and the scent of pine and old straw, the cold felt far off. Eloise rested her head on Nathaniel's shoulder, her eyes still on the drawing. "We'll need a table that creaks. I'll make it myself." This time she didn't look away. "And a bed that doesn't." He chuckled, low and warm. "That may take more work." She smiled, and for the first time it stayed. The snow came hard by the second week of December, laying down a quilt of silence over the ridge and burying the blackened bones of the old cabin beneath a thick, clean sheet. Nathaniel stood over the hearthstones they'd uncovered, snow-brushing his boots, while Eloise hammered the last peg into the sled they'd built from scrap timber and wagon boards. He turned toward her as she stepped back, brushing her hands against her skirt. "How's it ride?" he asked. "Straight enough. Might rattle some on the slope, but it'll hold the beams." She examined the rail runners, tilting her head. "We'll need to fetch wood early. That trail won't stay passable long." Nathaniel nodded, already moving toward the lean to where they'd stacked the axes. "We'll take the roan. Hitch him by the bridle, pack light." They made 3 runs before dusk, dragging cedar and pine lengths cut from the low drawn near Widow's Creek. By the time they rode back, the sky was purple with the last of the light and the sled half covered in frost. Inside the stable loft, Nathaniel stoked the stove while Eloise unwrapped the cloth sack of potatoes they'd traded for that morning. She set 2 beside the fire, wrapped in tin to roast. "You ever spend a winter like this?" she asked, squatting beside the stove. Closest was one year up near Santa Fe. Drove supply wagons. Slept under a tarp with snow on my boots. She turned, resting her chin on her knees. "You ever think about what life would have looked like if you hadn't left?" "Sometimes. But I was meant to go." Eloise's fingers curled around the hem of her wool skirt. "I never got to leave. I was always just being taken." Nathaniel knelt in front of her, quiet. "You're not being taken anywhere now." "I know." She looked down, then back up at him. "It still feels new." "That's all right. New things should." She nodded slowly and reached behind her to draw out a folded square of muslin. "I made something." She handed it over, her thumb brushing his as she let go. Nathaniel unfolded it. A hand-stitched square of cloth, pale blue, with 2 names sewn into the bottom edge, Nathaniel. "Eloise." He looked at her, something flickering behind his eyes. "Where'd you get the blue?" "Rusted nails soaked in vinegar. Took days." He ran his thumb over the thread. "You planning to sew this into something?" "I want to hang it above the hearth. When we build it." He folded it with care and set it on the small shelf they'd nailed to the wall. "Then we'll make sure the hearth's worthy of it." They ate the potatoes in silence, the room warm with firelight and the slow creak of the beams above them. Afterward, Nathaniel lit the lantern and pulled out the saw blade he'd been sharpening the night before. "We'll need joists cut by end of the week," he said, "if we're to raise the roof before the next snow." Eloise leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I can draw the frame lines. I remember how the beams lay from the old burn." He looked up from the blade. "You're sure?" "I remember everything I see." He smiled then, not for show, but because it rose up quiet and certain. "Then we'll mark them together." By the end of the week, the wind had turned, blowing sharp and dry from the north. They worked in layered coats, fingers stiff inside gloves, hauling timber and climbing ladders Nathaniel had built from scavenged fence rails. The frame took shape slow but certain. A square room, pitched low against the wind, with a chimney stone rising like a promise. One morning, as Nathaniel stood fitting a crossbeam, Eloise called up from below. "You ever think you'd be building a roof with someone?" He looked down at her, the snow caught in her hair. "I didn't figure I'd be building anything that lasted." She stepped back, taking in the skeleton of the cabin. "It's not much yet. It's more than I had." That night, they slept on the stone hearth, wrapped in blankets and the scent of new pine. The roof was still open to the stars, but the walls held and the wind passed around them instead of through. Eloise lay beside him, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "I used to think I was only what people left behind." Nathaniel turned toward her, resting his forehead against hers. "You're what I came looking for." She drew in a slow breath. "Then stay. Not for the winter. For good." He kissed her then, gentle and sure, the kind of kiss that said yes without needing a word. They finished the cabin by the end of January. Mud and straw sealed the cracks and the chimney burned clean. Nathaniel built the table from leftover floorboards and it did creak when leaned on. Eloise hung the muslin square above the hearth just like she said she would. They planted in spring beans, squash, and a patch of corn just beyond the shed. Nathaniel traded for 2 hens and a goat. Eloise bartered her stitches for a tin kettle and 3 jars of pickled beets. They didn't speak of the past unless it rose up quiet between them, and when it did, they met it together. By summer, the fields were green and the cabin full of laughter that came easy. The roan grazed near the fence line and the loft above the stable stayed empty, save for the mice. One evening, as the sun settled behind the ridge and the kitchen smelled of dill and roasted onions, Nathaniel stepped out onto the porch where Eloise sat shelling peas. "I passed the mill this morning," he said, sitting beside her. She glanced at him, smiling. "And man said there's a schoolhouse going up near the far creek. They're looking for someone to help teach reading come fall." She leaned her shoulder against his. "Think I could do that?" "I think you already do." She rested her head on his shoulder, the bowl of peas between them, the porch warm beneath their feet. And they stayed through the summers and the rains, the first hard frost, the long quiet winters, and the soft return of spring. They built a life not from what they'd lost, but from what they chose each day to keep. Together, always.